This audiobook is provided by Popping Team. Book name, In Just 1 Year, The Billionaire's Wife's Unconditional Love, by author 𝙤𝙪regirl22. Chapter 1. It was the middle of January and the whole 𝙪𝙪 was covered in thick white snow. Few middle-aged people with their children could be seen roaming on the streets while enjoying the soft white snowfall. Celeste, who was standing by the window, sighed looking at the scene in front of her. She wanted to go out and enjoy the snowfall, but her grandma didn't allow her since they were expecting some important guests to come to their house that day. "I don't think they will be coming today, Grandma. It's already been so late." "Don't you think so?" she asked, turning towards the old woman who was leisurely sitting on the sofa with a patient look on her face. She kept the book she was reading aside and took off her thin glasses off her eyes. She wiped it with the corner of the thick brown sweater she was wearing before putting it on again. "Don't worry. They will come." Marielle, the older woman and also Celeste's grandma, replied while getting up from the sofa. She sighed looking at her impatient granddaughter. She was always like that even though she had grown up and turned into a wonderful lady. "But I still couldn't understand why they would choose me as their son's bride. Did they know me from before?" Celeste asked in a soft voice, looking towards her grandmother's direction. She was still in shock knowing that soon she was going to get married to some unknown guy. It was truly shocking for her fragile heart. 11 days ago a man and a woman dressed in elegant suits and dress came to their house and talked to her grandma regarding some stuff unknown to her. They asked her a few questions like how old she was, where and what she studied, her future plans, etc., etc. It kinda creeped her out, but she managed to stay calm and answer all of their questions. That year she was going to turn into 24 years. She recently graduated with a degree in economics and was looking for a job while taking care of her old grandma. Her parents died when she was just a child, leaving her in all care of her grandparents. They were her mother's parents. She didn't know about her father's family as he was an orphan. Her parents met each other in their high school days, fell in love and got married. She didn't have any memories of her parents. She was just 4 years old back then. Her grandfather died of heart disease a few years back, and since then it's been only her and her grandma. Because Andrew loves his mother a lot, so he would definitely fulfill her last wish. Your father had saved Rosemary's life once from an accident, so she wanted to repay him in this life by taking care of his daughter. That's why she wished her older grandson to marry you and take care of you for the rest of your life. I do not have many days left to take care of you. So once I leave, I want someone I trust to take care of my darling." Marielle told her granddaughter in an emotional voice, making Celeste a bit upset, but was true though. "Oh Grandma. Don't say something like that. You are so strong and healthy that you will live at least 30 years more," Celeste said while hugging her grandma tightly. Marielle chuckled at her antics. All of a sudden they heard a car honk from outside. They immediately understood it was the Rodriguezes. "This is your room, dear. You will live here until the wedding day. You can rest now. We will meet again at the dinner table," Mrs. Rodriguez said while showing Celeste a big room which was twice as big as her previous one. She nodded softly while Clarissa smiled before exiting the room. Celeste looked around the room closely. It was a luxurious room with a huge bed, a huge closet, an attached bathroom, a big screen TV and some other furniture. It turned out that Rodriguezes were really rich. She sighed before pulling her luggage aside and seating on the bed. The whole room was painted in white and purple, giving it a warm, colorful vibe. Celeste freed her head from her ponytail and laid down on the bed on her back while her legs were hanging on edge of the bed. In just a span of a few hours her whole life had changed completely. She was brought to Toronto from her beloved 𝙪𝙪 to marry some unknown person. Though 𝙪𝙪 was only 2 hours drive away from Toronto, she still felt it was too far. She didn't want to leave her grandmother alone. But it was her grandma who wanted her to marry and live safely for the rest of her life. She was raised as an obedient girl since her childhood. So she couldn't just argue with her grandma and say no. In the end she agreed meekly. She never went out of 𝙪𝙪. It was the first time for her to travel out of that small town of hers. On the present day, when Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez went to bring her here, she didn't know about it until the last moment, when her grandma told her to pack her luggage as she was to be married in 7 days to Liam Rodriguez. She was a bit shocked. She knew she was going to get married but didn't expect it would be so soon. Both Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez were good people, so they comforted her like her own parents. She felt a bit relieved that they weren't snobby as other rich people. They were polite and warm. They didn't make her feel unwanted or low. She was sure they would treat her well. But she didn't know her future husband. It scared her a bit. She didn't know if he was happy with this marriage or not. What if he didn't like her? Sighing, she brushed her thoughts aside and got up to freshen up. It was already getting dark outside. She quickly took out some clothes and went to get changed in the attached bathroom. Chapter 2. Are you feeling nervous, dear? Clarissa asked Celeste with a sympathetic smile. She could understand her uneasiness. She too had an arranged marriage with her husband, but they fell in love after being engaged to each other for almost a year. She knew Celeste wasn't habituated with that type of environment. Everything was new for her. A bit. Celeste replied with a soft smile on her face. She was wearing a soft green dress with a cardigan while her hair was left open. Clarissa shook her head at her with a soft smile of her own. It's normal. You will get used to it gradually. I also felt the same when I was getting married to Andrew. Everything was so new for me, Clarissa said with a smile while they walked through the hallway towards the dining room. Clarissa came personally to take Celeste so that she wouldn't feel uncomfortable or unwanted. Really? Celeste asked, a bit shocked. She didn't expect Clarissa to have an arranged marriage, with Andrew noticing how much they loved each other. It showed in their actions. Clarissa nodded. Yes. Don't worry, Liam will take good care of you. Though my son is a workaholic and gets angry easily, he isn't overbearing. Clarissa said with a soft chuckle as they reached the dining room where everyone was seating. Celeste again nodded nervously. She wasn't sure how to respond to this. Though she wanted to meet and know more about her future husband, she didn't say it aloud, fearing what others might think of her. Come on, dear, take a seat, Clarissa said to Celeste in a warm, welcoming voice when she noticed Celeste was still standing at the entrance. Come, Celeste. Sit beside me, Andrew said in a warm voice to the poor, frightened girl. Celeste nodded with a smile and went to sit beside his left side, while Clarissa was on the right. Clarissa noticed there was also another pair of couples sitting beside each other opposite to her while stealing glances at her. Raphael, Amy. This is Celeste, Liam's fiancé, and Celeste, he's my younger son Raphael and his wife Amy. Andrew introduced them to each other. Hello, Celeste mumbled softly with a shy smile. Hi. It's nice to meet you, finally, Raphael said with a cute grin while Amy just gave her a polite nod. Same here, Celeste replied with a smile. She could tell Raphael was exactly like his mother, with the same green eyes, blonde hair, and fair complexion. He was a good-looking young man in his mid-20s, while his wife Amy had black eyes, black hair, and fair skin. She looked more like Asian. Where is Liam? Why isn't he here yet? Andrew asked, noticing Liam's absence, which also caught Celeste's attention. He will be coming in a while. He just returned a few minutes ago, maybe getting freshened up, Clarissa replied while serving a few dishes to her husband. 2 helpers were also helping to serve the dishes to everyone. Celeste, dear, please have anything you like without any hesitation, Clarissa said, turning towards Celeste when she noticed her hesitation. Celeste nodded and picked up some food on her plate. Sorry, I'm late. A deep husky voice rang in the whole room, making Celeste froze for a while. His presence felt so intimidating and powerful to her. Oh, Liam. Come, honey, have a seat, Clarissa said to her son warmly. Liam nodded and moved forward to take a seat beside an unknown girl whose identity he had already guessed. She was looking at her plate quietly, making him a bit curious about how she looked. Liam, this is Celeste, your future wife, and Celeste, this is my elder son Liam, Clarissa introduced them. The part where Clarissa uttered "your future wife" sounded ridiculous to Celeste's own ears. "Hello?" Liam's deep voice reached her ears, bringing her out of her thoughts. She looked up at him for not to be rude and froze. "Oh my God. So handsome." Deep, sharp, smoky gray eyes with long lashes, a sharp nose, high cheekbones with small beards, thin plump lips. Black hair. He was the true definition of a runway model. When Celeste realized she was staring for too long without replying, she averted her eyes. Hi." She mumbled softly while looking at her plate. She could still feel his eyes on her. But she didn't dare to look up. She could feel her heart jumping irregularly. She was afraid that everyone else in the room could hear it. "Liam, take out some time for tomorrow and take Celeste to show around the city and also to get to know each other," Andrew proposed cleverly. He knew his son wouldn't disobey him. "Okay. I will inform you when I'm free," Liam replied nonchalantly while picking up a few foods on his plates to eat. He didn't reject the idea instantly, which made Celeste a bit relieved. At least he was polite, which was a good sign. "So Celeste, what did you do before?" Raphael, who was silent, asked Celeste to start a conversation while looking at her. She could feel Liam also looking at her, waiting for her reply. "I have just recently graduated from college with a degree in economics. I have applied in a few companies and am waiting for their answer. Before that I used to work in my grandma's gift shop in 𝙧𝙪𝙨. She replied softly with a smile. She was glad her voice didn't shake. "That's nice. I have been to 𝙧𝙪𝙨 a few times. It's a wonderful place," Raphael said with a smile. He already liked the beautiful, soft-spoken girl. She could indeed be a beautiful match for his brother. "It is, with its amazing culture and heritage, limestone architecture and mountains. It always attracts a lot of tourists," Celeste replied happily. She always felt happy talking about her beloved hometown. It was so beautiful. Then we all could go one day to visit it together as a family. What do you say?" Andrew declared with a smile. Everyone nodded happily. "I'm done. So I will be heading out first as I have some pending works to be done." "Good night," Liam said while getting up. Everyone nodded at him. Celeste could feel his eyes on her for a few seconds before he left eventually. She sighed in relief. Chapter 3. Celeste kept tossing and turning around to sleep, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't fall asleep. Sighing, she kept looking at the white ceiling. She couldn't fathom this situation out no matter how hard she tried. Everything seemed like a blur for her. Just a few days ago she was in the gift shop with her grandma selling gifts and having fun with the tourists, but then all of a sudden she found herself lying on a bed in a house she never came before while waiting to be married she never knew before. How ironic. How did it take such a turn? She was afraid how these people would treat her after the marriage. She could tell her soon-to-be sister-in-law didn't like her much. One dinner with her she already figured it out by her expression. Also, she couldn't understand why a handsome, rich and successful person like Liam Rodriguez would agree to marry a girl like her. She agreed she was a bit beautiful. Everyone in 𝙧𝙪𝙨 praised her for her beautiful looks. Her grandmother told her she looked exactly like her father, but she had her mother's dark brown hair and deep blue-green eyes. She didn't have those models-like figures, nor she was rich. Instead she had a small 5 feet 5 inches tall slim build. She sometimes felt frustrated with how skinny she was. No matter how much she ate, that food would get her nowhere near some curves. Though she was grateful that her bones didn't show like a sick person. She didn't have fair complexion but golden complexion from the huge amount of time she spent outdoors. If it's not for looks, not for money, then what? Liam's grandmother also passed away a few months ago, so they didn't have to stick to her wish. Maybe her grandma's words were true. Mr. Rodriguez truly loved and respected his mother, that's why he wanted to fulfill her last wish so eagerly by getting her married to his elder son. After having a deep sigh, Celeste brushed aside her thoughts and got up from the bed. She then decided to head over to the terrace for a while to get some fresh air. She didn't know the way to the terrace clearly, but Clarissa had shown her when she gave her a little tour of the mansion. She moved through the hallway and reached the staircase. She was careful not to wake anyone up. It was almost 11 in the night, so everyone was already sleeping by then. The house wasn't completely dark, but few dim lights were on, making it easy for her to move around without making any kind of noises. She reached the entrance of the terrace in the meantime and heaved a sigh. She frowned when she noticed the door of the terrace was left open. Weren't they afraid that some robbers might enter using it? She got her answer when she entered the terrace area. Her eyes went wide when she noticed a tall figure was standing over near the railing. She didn't know how to react when she realized someone else was also present beside her, and that person was smoking with their back on her. Maybe that person had noticed her presence too, so he turned around and looked at her. For a moment Celeste had thought she should leave before that person noticed her presence, but it didn't happen. "I'm sorry, I didn't know someone was here. I just came here for fresh air, but I will just leave you here. Don't mind me," she said hurriedly in a panicked voice and turned to leave. She couldn't see who it was because of darkness. "No problem. You can stay here," came a deep masculine voice from behind her. She instantly recognized it as Liam's. She didn't know why all of a sudden her heart started to beat so fast. With nervousness flowing inside her, she turned around. At that moment she could see his face a bit clearly under the dim light of the terrace. She moved quietly where he was standing. She could feel his eyes on her, looking at her every step closely. It made her more nervous. She also noticed he had already thrown the cigarette he was smoking. It made her a bit relieved as she couldn't stand the smell of cigarettes. It made her nauseous. "Couldn't sleep?" Liam asked in the deep, domineering voice, making her a bit intimidated. She stood stiffly beside him and shook her head in negative. No. I am just not used to sleeping without my grandma," she replied in a low, soft voice while looking down on the floor. She could feel his eyes boring hole into her. "You still sleep with your grandma?" he asked, if his tone was somewhat amused. So she looked up to look at him. As she predicted, he had one of his brows raised perfectly with an amused expression. "Yes. It's a habit since my grandpa died." She half lied. She couldn't just tell him she was afraid of darkness and got nightmares frequently. He was practically still a stranger to her. "Oh, I see," he mumbled and turned around to face the railing. He rested his hands on the railing while lowering his height a bit. Celeste also turned around following his action. It was a bit cold outside. She still felt a bit cold even when she was wearing warm clothes. She rubbed her hands to keep it warm. Then she looked at him and noticed he was wearing a thick black hoodie with some sweatpants. The atmosphere fell into an awkward silence. None of them knew what to say next. Celeste wanted to ask him a few questions, but she couldn't understand how to say it first. After debating with herself for a few moments, she decided to ask him. "Why did you agree to marry me?" Chapter 4. After debating with herself for a few moments, she decided to ask him. "Why did you agree to marry me? I mean, you could have said no." Finally, Celeste asked the question which was bothering her since the beginning. She looked at Liam's direction for an answer, but found him already looking at her. His face was void of any emotion. Not able to keep gazing at his eyes, she averted her eyes and looked ahead of her at nothing particular. "My grandmother means a lot to me. She wanted me to marry you and I respect her decision. To be honest, I never wanted to get married, not this early, but I didn't want to hurt her," he explained in a clear yet deep voice. Celeste couldn't understand why, but his voice gave some sort of peace to her heart. "I understand. But don't you have any girlfriend? I mean, you are handsome, smart and rich, so you must have quite a few admirers," she said in a soft tone while smiling awkwardly. Suddenly she heard him chuckle loudly, making her feel a little bit embarrassed. She looked at him in awe. It sounded some kind of music to her ears. "God. What's happening to me?" she thought mentally. "You find me handsome? Huh?" Liam couldn't help but tease the small cute girl beside him. It's not like that. I just, She mumbled awkwardly in embarrassment. Heat already crept out on her face, making her face go all red due to intense blushing. No. Currently I don't have any girlfriend. I had few in the past though, but none of them were serious. What about you? He replied first, then asked her while looking directly at her with a curious look. I had one when I was in my second year. We just dated for a few months when he transferred to another country as an exchange student and we lost contact gradually. After that I haven't had any. She replied with a smile. Liam nodded and responded with a simple "oh." What do you expect from your wife? Suddenly she asked after a moment of pause. She thought she needed to know this to reach his expectation and live peacefully with him in the future. Nothing much. I just need you to be understanding towards me and my work and bond well with my family. My family is the most important thing in my life. But I promise I will never interfere with your life and always be respectful. You will have your own freedom. He replied. His voice was deep, firm and serious. Celeste looked up at him. His expression told he meant everything he said. I understand. I will try not to disappoint you. She said, nodding. She understood his point. He wasn't an overbearing person, which relieved her. May I ask, why did you agree to marry me? You are young and still have a bright future ahead. He stated while looking at her closely like he was trying to read her. I don't have anyone except my grandma. She always worries about my future and who will take care of me if something happens to me, even though I'm 23, and perfectly capable of taking care of myself. When your parents came to our house with the marriage proposal, she was really happy. She wanted me to marry you. I couldn't say no seeing her so happy. But I don't regret my choice. She said the last part looking directly at his eyes, which was already looking at her intently. His gray eyes were like an enigma, making her drawn to them without any control. After a while they looked away and he nodded. It's already very late and getting cold. We should head inside, otherwise we will catch a cold. Celeste said without looking at him. Yeah, let's go. He said while moving from where he was standing. Celeste nodded and followed him out of the terrace. She realized Liam wasn't a rude, arrogant or spoilt person like some other rich heirs, instead he was a gentle and warm person. It made her happy. Whatever future they would have wouldn't be that hard, right? With a smile on her face she followed Liam and came near the hallway. Liam insisted on accompanying her till her room and she nodded. Finally they reached her room in silence. She turned to look at Liam and smiled softly before saying, "Good night." Her soft voice reached Liam's ears. He nodded firmly while his stormy gray eyes kept looking at her. "Good night, Celeste," he said in his deep voice before turning away to go to his room. Celeste kept looking at his retiring back for a while before shaking her head with a smile. She then opened the door of her room and entered. It was already past 12, so she went directly under the soft comforter of the bed. This time the peaceful sleep she was waiting for so long came faster than she expected. Chapter 5. Saturday mornings were always best to Celeste. She could relax 2 days straight without doing anything else. But everything had changed. She started to get up early in the morning to cook breakfast with Tracy and then did other stuff to relieve her boredom. Though she's used to cooking, she wasn't used to this loneliness. She missed her home and grandma. She missed her grandma's handmade waffles, which were the best if you ask. Sighing, she rolled around the bed lazily. She was never a morning person. She loved to sleep. But there's no way out now. She slowly got up from the bed and straight went to the washroom to do her morning routine. After getting freshened up and changing into cotton shorts and baggy sweater, she came out of her room to eat some breakfast. She knew she got up late today. Tracy didn't even wake her up. When she reached the kitchen, she found Tracy making breakfast quietly while humming a soft tone. She smiled and made her presence known in the kitchen by greeting her with enthusiasm. Good morning, Tracy. Why didn't you wake me up a bit earlier? See, I'm late, she said with a pout while taking a seat on the kitchen counter. Tracy, the middle-aged woman, smiled at her brightly. Good morning, dear. I thought I would let you sleep a bit more. Anyways, come eat. I made your favorite waffles today with some bacon and eggs, Tracy said in her motherly tone while serving her breakfast. Celeste nodded happily while taking the plate and starting to eat after thanking Tracy. Have you eaten already? If not, then please join me, Celeste said after a moment of pause while looking up at Tracy. Tracy shook her head and smiled. I have already eaten. Don't worry, she said with a smile, making Celeste nod and resume eating her food. Did Mr. Rodriguez call you? When will he be returning? It's been 2 weeks already, Tracy said in a concerned voice, making Celeste pause her eating. She looked up and smiled to cheer that older woman up before answering. Yes. He said it might take a few more days, Celeste replied and continued eating her food. Tracy was worried for this young girl. She was living alone in this huge apartment for the past 2 weeks. She herself came only to cook the 3 meals and left after that. She knew Celeste was new here in this city and didn't know anything here that much, which worried her more. But she couldn't do anything about it. She once proposed to live with her till Mr. Rodriguez came back from his business trip, but Celeste refused. Sighing, Tracy picked up her things and got ready to leave. I have kept some foods for you in the fridge. If you get hungry, then eat those. I will be taking my leave now. Take care, dear.
Bye,
Tracy informed Celeste, and she nodded. You too, take care, Tracy.
Bye,
she said while wiping her hands with a napkin. She watched Tracy leaving before she moved towards the huge living room to watch some movies. She settled on the couch and played Maleficent, the Mistress of Evil. It's been 2 weeks since she had married Liam Rodriguez and moved into his apartment with him. It's been 2 years since he went on a business trip just after their wedding reception day. It's also been since she had signed that 1-year contract marriage agreement. Everything happened so fast that she couldn't predict anything out of it. After that night on the terrace, Liam took her out on lunch the next day and they spent some time to get to know each other better. She agreed she was attracted to him from the moment she laid her eyes on him. Those times she spent with him made her like him even more. He was a gentle, passionate, and soft-spoken person. On the other hand, she was shy but loud and stubborn person. Everything was good until the wedding day. Before that, her mother-in-law took really good care of her. Her in-laws made her feel like she was at her own home, except Amy. Amy was a Filipino-Canadian girl. She and Rafael got married a year ago when Rafael made her pregnant. But unfortunately their baby died after their marriage due to miscarriage. Celeste was sad to hear that, but she didn't understand why Amy didn't like her. She snarled at her and threw crude remarks at her whenever they were alone, but in front of others she kept mum. Celeste knew better than to stay around her, so she kept her distance. When Celeste's wedding day arrived, her mother-in-law helped her to get ready. It was a small wedding in a small church with only family and close friends present. Her father-in-law had decided to walk her to the altar since her own parents were dead. She was dressed in a beautiful princess wedding gown, looking like a princess herself. Clarissa went to bring Andrew, leaving her alone with the beautician. She was waiting for her father-in-law to come and take her to the altar when suddenly Liam entered the room. Celeste looked at him with shock evident in her eyes. He was standing near the door dressed in a blue tux and white dress shirt, looking all handsome and dashing. For a moment Celeste felt like she couldn't breathe as her heart was beating so fast. Liam signaled the beautician to leave them alone and she complied by leaving. Celeste got up from her seat and looked at him in confusion. Do you need anything? Celeste asked softly. She was curious to know why he was here when he was supposed to be at the altar waiting for her. Yes. I need you to sign this, Liam replied in a stoic, emotionless voice while handing her some papers. Celeste took the papers with a bit of hesitation. She was confused yet curious. What's it? she asked, looking through the papers, when the mutual marriage agreement written on top of the papers caught her attention. Her eyes went wide in shock. She looked up at Liam for further explanation. Liam sighed. He had already expected this kind of reaction. It's a marriage agreement contract. According to it, we will stay married for a year, then divorced, so we won't have to stay tied in this arranged marriage. After a year we both will be free. Don't worry, you will get $10 million as an alimony. So please sign it. He said in his deep, emotionless voice. His voice was firm and clear. It didn't even shake a bit. Celeste looked at his face for any trace of joke, but he was serious as the night sky. His face was blank. Is it necessary? She asked simply. Her voice was also composed. She was stupid to think a man like Liam Rodriguez would marry a girl like her without any condition. She was truly naive. Yes, came his clear and firm voice. She didn't say anything further. She just simply picked up the pen and signed it without reading. She then handed the contract to him with a smile. Her grandma had taught her, no matter how hard the situation was, always smile. She always followed the motto. You didn't read the contract. It wasn't a question but a statement. He was a bit startled when she signed the contract without reading, with just a simple question from her side. But he concealed his thoughts without letting it show on his face. There's nothing for me to lose, Celeste replied with a careless shrug. It didn't matter to her. She just let everything flow in its own way. That way it was much better. Okay. I will take my leave now. See you at the altar, he said curtly. With a last glance at her direction, he turned around and left. Celeste watched his retiring back in silence. After a while, an excited Clarissa came smiling at Andrew and took her to seal her fate forever. Just one chaste kiss on her lips from Liam tied her fate with Liam Rodriguez for a year or for the rest of her life, she didn't know. Chapter 6. It was past 7 in the evening. Celeste cooked some food for herself as Tracy couldn't come to cook dinner. She had called in the evening saying her husband was sick, so she might not come. Celeste told her not to worry and gave her leave. She informed her to come when her husband recovered. Tracy agreed and was grateful, as she didn't have anyone else to take care of her husband. She was finished with cooking pasta and her favorite chicken Alfredo when she heard the front door opened. She was a bit confused at who could be here at this moment. She got her answer when she came out of the kitchen. Standing before her was her long-lost husband. She shook her head at the dramatic thought of hers. You are back early? She asked while moving towards him at a slow pace. He looked tired, but his tiredness couldn't hide his handsomeness. He was dressed in a gray business suit, looking like a male model came straight out of the magazine. Yeah, my meeting finished off early, so I took the next flight available, he said while massaging his temples. Oh. You go get freshened up. I will serve dinner, she informed me with a smile. He nodded and moved towards their bedroom. Celeste hurriedly tried to fix her looks a bit. She knew she looked like a bird came straight out of her nest, with the messy bun and baggy sweaters with shorts. She returned back to the kitchen and finished garnishing those dishes before placing it on the dining table. After almost 30 minutes, Liam came down and joined the dinner. She took him in properly. She's showing him after 2 weeks. Though they kept talking once a day over the phone and texted a few times, but seeing him in real life was much better than that. It relieved her loneliness a bit. I made some chicken pasta, chicken Alfredo, and roasted potatoes. I hope you don't mind, she said while helping him in serving the food for himself. Liam nodded with a smile, with his cute dimple showing. It made Celeste's heart skip a beat. She never knew someone could look so handsome while sitting casually in just a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. No, it's okay. How have you been? Did you face any problem? He asked casually while taking a bite of his food. He paused for a moment, taking the amazing taste of her handmade food sink in him. Everything is okay. I visited mom and dad a few times and Ariana also came over to keep me in company. How did your meeting go? She asked while eating. Sharon was Liam's cousin from his father's side. She had met her a few days before her wedding and they instantly clicked. Sharon was an outgoing adventure lover girl. Over the few weeks they became really good friends. Sharon was 2 years younger than Celeste and in her last year of college though. Good. We will start the hotel construction there soon. You make really good food BTW. He complimented her cooking, making her smile shyly. Thank you. She mumbled in a soft voice while finishing her food. Have you decided which company you will join? Liam asked after a while wiping her hands with a napkin. Yes. I thought of joining the Sayers Corporation. She informed him with a smile. She picked up the dirty dishes and moved to the kitchen to keep them in the sink. Good choice. Tell me if you need any help, he said while looking at her petite figure moving around the fridge. She was beautiful. There was no denying in that, but with it she was also very smart. He had run a biodata check on her which impressed him a lot. He had offered her to join his company but she refused, saying she wanted to do it on her own. He didn't argue any further and let her do what she wanted. Okay. She simply replied while wiping her hands with a napkin after washing the dishes. I have some work. I will be in my study for a while, he informed her before moving forward to the direction of his study. Celeste sighed and moved towards their bedroom. She felt kind of sticky after cooking, so she decided to take a quick shower to get rid of this. She reached her room and went directly to the bathroom after picking up a simple nightie to wear. After a quick relaxing shower she came out wearing the nightie, which had a thin strap and reached till her knee. She was used to wearing these from before. She was wiping her wet hair while coming out when her eyes landed on Liam, who was lying down on the bed with his back relaxed on the headboard. He had his laptop placed on his stomach doing something. She was a bit nervous as it would be their second time sharing a room. The first time was on their wedding night, but they didn't do the deed. Her face burned red thinking of the indecent thing. She moved towards her dresser and blow-dried her hair after keeping the damp towel aside. She could feel his eyes on her. It made her heart beat like crazy. After she was done blow-drying her hair she moved towards the bed. It was almost 10 o'clock. She got in the bed silently while pulling the comforter on before lying down. Good night. Turning towards him she mumbled softly before giving him her back view again. Good night. Liam replied while still staring at her back. He could see a portion of her golden-skinned back. It looked so alluring. From the moment she came out of the washroom he stole glances of her. He didn't deny the fact that he was attracted to his beautiful wife. Seeing him so close to him while her lavender scent reached his nostrils, it made him feel excited yet uncomfortable. Sighing, he closed his laptop and put it aside before turning the lights off. The room wasn't completely dark though. The dim light was still on in the distance. Liam slipped under the comforter and laid down beside her before closing his eyes. His front was facing her alluring back. After a while, when Celeste noticed his breathing was even, she turned around unconsciously, which was a bad move. As soon as she turned around, her face almost touched his face while her legs tangled with her. She didn't realize he was that close to her. Her eyes went wide when she noticed he was staring at her with those deep stormy gray eyes. His face was so close to her that she could feel his hot breath on her face, making goosebumps arise in her whole body. He was looking at her so intensely with those dark eyes that it made her shiver. She bit her lips unconsciously, not knowing how to react. After a while Liam slowly leaned his face towards her and before she could react his lips touched her in a heartbeat,